Now let us learn about the Mendel's law of inheritance. So before we move on to the law, we should know who was the father of genetics and how he came up with this inheritance law and all those things. So as we all know, it was Gregor Mendel who is called as the father of genetics. So it was during the mid 19th century that he made an understanding of inheritance. So it was during the mid of 19th century Mendel understood the importance of, or the way through which this inheritance happens. And Gregor Mendel, he conducted hybridization experiments on garden peas, that is Pisum sativum, for 7 years, that is from 1856 till 1863. He conducted many hybridization experiments on garden peas. Namely green peas illa thaneyana garden peas. Green peas alling garden peas he conducted experiments for about 7 years. Okay, and he proposed the law of inheritance in living organism. He took the plant as a sample to study this inheritance pattern, and he came up with the laws of inheritance, right? See, he proposed the law of inheritance in living organism, right? Now Gregor Mendel, he did some hybridization experiments. Now what are hybrids? Hybrids are nothing but when two genetically unsimilar parents are mated, and when they form a new individual, we are calling it as hybrid, right? So hybridization techniques na parayumbo, Gregor Mendel, he selected anther from one flower and he used that anther to for pollination into another flower of his desired characters. അപ്പോൾ അവർക്ക് വേണ്ട പോലെ ഒരു ഫ്ലവറിൽ പോയിട്ട് ഈ ആന്തറിനെ അവർ ഡസ്റ്റ് ചെയ്യും, ആൻഡ് ഹി saw the results of that. That is why it is hybridization. So he did not do it on the same genetically identical parent organism. It was done between two genetically unidentical parent organism. Okay, so that is why it is hybridization experiment, and it was from the year 1856 till 1863. He for 7 years he worked continuously, and he came up with the laws of inheritance. And during Mendel's investigation into inheritance pattern, it was the first time that statistical analysis and mathematical logics were applied to biology. Okay, so until that there were many discussions and discoveries about genetics, but no one gave an idea of the statistical analysis and the mathematical logic in the biology of the genetics, right? So his experiments had he had many advantages, like his experiment had large sampling size, which gave greater credibility to the data he collected. Okay, so along with that he carried out experiment in thousands of plants, so that what happened, he got a larger sampling size, and due to this larger sampling size, the credibility of the data he collected was very greater, and also the confirmation of his inferences, that is conclusions from his findings from the experiments on successive generation of this test plant, proved that his results pointed to general routes of inheritance rather than being unsustained ideas. പല തരത്തിലുള്ള റിസൾട്ട്സ് കിട്ടാണ്ട് പ്രോപ്പർ ആയിട്ട് ആ ഒരു പാറ്റേണിൽ തന്നെ ഈ ലോ ഓഫ് ഇൻഹെറിറ്റൻസ് അവരെ കൊണ്ടുവന്ന ആ പാറ്റേണിൽ തന്നെ പിന്നെയും അവർക്ക് റിസൾട്ട് കിട്ടിയോണ്ട് he came up with the law of inheritance, right? And Mendel investigated characters in the garden pea plant that were manifested as two opposing characters, that is traits. Okay, means that he used traits which were different from one another. Opposing traits are very selected. If it was tall, he selected a plant which was dwarf, and if it is yellow colored seed, and he selected a plant with green color seed. Okay, so this allowed him to set up a basic frame of rules governing inheritance, which was later expanded by scientists to account for all diverse natural observations and the complexity inherent in them. Right, so Mendel was the one who started it with the plants, but many other scientists using the knowledge of the statistical and the mathematical knowledge, they came up with many observations which were done in diverse ways. Natural observations were done, and complexity of the inheritance were also understood using the other scientists, right? So what did Mendel use? Mendel conducted such artificial pollination or cross-pollination experiments using several true breeding pea lines. He selected several true breeding pure lines. True breeding means every time when the self-pollination is happening, the pure breed will always produce the same genetic makeup plants. Offspring same ആയിരിക്കും. എത്ര പ്രാവശ്യം അത് നമ്മൾ ട്രൂ ബ്രീഡിനെ സെൽഫ് പോളിനേറ്റ് ചെയ്താലും പിന്നെയും it will form only the parent characters, right? So he selected such pure breeding pea plants. So he conducted such artificial pollination or cross pollination experiments using several true breeding pea lines. A true breeding line is one that having undergone continuous self-pollination and they show the stable trait inherit and expression for several generations. ഇപ്പോൾ ടോൾനെസ്സിന് കോഡ് ചെയ്യുന്ന ഒരു ട്രൂ ബ്രീഡ് അവരെടുത്തിട്ടുണ്ടെങ്കിൽ എത്ര പ്രാവശ്യം സെൽഫ് പോളിനേഷൻ ചെയ്താലും it will give only tall charactered alleles in them. They will have only the tall charactered alleles and they will show only the tall appearance of the tall plant, right? And Mendel selected 14 true breeding pea plant varieties as pairs which were similar except for one character with contrasting characters. ബാക്കി എല്ലാ charactersum same ആയിരിക്കും, പക്ഷേ they will be differing in only one character, that is tall, dwarf. So this is one character which has the contrasting trait in them. So some of the contrasting traits which were selected were smooth or wrinkled seed, or yellow or green seeds, smooth or inflated pods, green or yellow pods, and tall or dwarf plants. So these were the few traits which he had selected. I'll just show the 7 true breeding varieties he selected, right? 14 true breed. It means that contrasting character they're just saying that 7 true breed. So the first one was the stem height, which is tall or dwarf, and next was the flower position, which is axial or terminal. Axial എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് the flower which grows in the axial position like this. It is not in the terminal position. End portionലല്ല, middle ലീഫിൻ്റെ എല്ലാം നടുക്ക് വളരുന്ന പ്ലാന്റ്സിനെയാണ് ഫ്ലവേഴ്സിനെയാണ് axial flowers എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്. And terminal flowers are the one who end, the part of the stem will end in the flower. So that is called as terminal flower. And then flower color was chosen. The true breeding varieties of violet and white were taken. Violet and white were taken, and that dominant trait was violet, and white was the recessive trait. And he used pod shape also. Pod എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് these are structure inside which the seeds will be present. So these pod shapes അതിൻ്റെ ഫ്രൂട്ടാണ് ആ പോഡ്സ് ആയിട്ടുള്ളത്. So its shape is either inflated or constricted. Inflated എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ കുറച്ച് വീങ്ങിയ പോലെ ഉണ്ടാവും. Constricted എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് കുറച്ചൊരു ചുരുക്കങ്ങൾ കാണാൻ പറ്റും, right? And then comes the pod color, which is either yellow or the green. So green is the dominant trait and yellow is the recessive trait. And now coming to the seed shape, they are either round or wrinkled. റൗണ്ട് എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് പ്രോപ്പർ ഗ്രീൻ കളറിലുള്ള പ്രോപ്പർ ഷേപ്പ്ഡ് സ്ട്രക്ചേഴ്സ് ആണ്. wrinkled എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ ചുരുങ്ങിയത്, right? And he took seed color also, which is yellow and green. Yellow is the dominant trait and green is the recessive trait. So these were the 14 true breeding varieties which were selected by Mendel. അപ്പോൾ ഈ characters വെച്ചിട്ടാണ് he postulated the law of inheritance. Okay, so now let us move on to the inheritance of the Mendel's pea plant. Before we move on to that Mendel's experiment, we should know the steps involved in this hybridization technique. As I said, he used hybridization technique. That's the main point I to hybridization techniques or experiments were done on garden peas. So, hybridization nadathanengil, there should be a few characters which few steps which has to be followed by the hybridizing person. So they have to select 2 pea plants with contrasting characters. So Mendel has chosen such contrasting characters pea plant. Then they have to carry out emasculation process. I hope you remember it, right? So emasculation is removal of anther of one plant to avoid self pollination. Okay, and this is female parent. അപ്പോൾ അതിലുള്ള ആന്തേഴ്സിനെ റിമൂവ് ചെയ്താളിയും ഏത് പ്ലാന്റ് ആണോ സെലക്ട് ചെയ്തിട്ടുള്ള ഹൈബ്രിഡൈസേഷനിൽ അതിൽ ഒരു പ്ലാന്റിലുള്ള ഒരു പ്ലാന്റിലുള്ള മെയിൽ പാർട്ടിന് ദേ വിൽ റിമൂവ് ഇറ്റ്. by emasculation, that is removal of anther of one plant to avoid self-pollination. So I told you that hybridization is going to happen. Hybridization എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ അവിടെ ക്രോസ് പോളിനേഷൻ ആയിരിക്കണം, right? So to avoid the self-pollination from one of the parent, the anther is being removed. So removal of anthers of one plant to avoid self-pollination. This is the female parent. അപ്പോൾ ഇതായിരിക്കും female parent. Now if you take the case of second step which is involved is, third step which is involved is pollination. So here collection of pollen grains from male parent and transferring to the female parent is called as pollination. Okay, ഇപ്പോൾ ഏത് desired male parent ആണോ വേണ്ടത് ആ male parent anther collect ചെയ്ത് it is transferred to the female parent. And then collection and germination of seeds to produce offspring. So after once the pollination has happened, it will give rise to formation of seeds. No, so this has to be collected. These seeds has to be collected and it has to be germinated. adine pinneyum germinate ചെയ്ത് നോക്കണം to see what type of offsprings they produce. So these are the steps which is involved in the process of Mendel. Okay, so he chose two contrasting characters. He carried out emasculation in one flower which removes the male parent, and then he carries out with pollination where cross pollination is done, and then collection and germination of the seed is happening. Okay, now let us move on to the inheritance of the Mendel, right? So first let us see about the inheritance of one gene. ഒരു single gene എടുത്തിട്ട് how did he study the inheritance? That is what we are going to learn first. It is called as Monohybrid Cross. ഒരു single gene വെച്ചിട്ട് മാത്രമാണ് we are going to learn about the hybridization technique. So let us take the example of one hybridization experiment which was carried out by Mendel when he crossed tall and dwarf pea plant. ഒരു tall parentum dwarf pea plant ന്റെ parentum, they are crossing it. That is Mendel crossed it to study the inheritance of one gene. ഏത് gene ആണ്? ഈ tall and dwarf ന്റെ characteristic പഠിക്കാൻ വേണ്ടിയാണ് he chose it. Right, so what did Mendel do? He collected the seeds produced as a result of this cross and then he grew them to generate plants of the first hybrid generation. So he first chose one character, that is tall and dwarf എന്ന് പറയുന്ന ഒരു contrasting character എടുത്ത് and he cross pollinated the tall and dwarf, which means that anther from this flower were put on the that is the style of the other flower. Okay, and there what will happen? Pollination നടന്നു കഴിഞ്ഞ ശേഷം then the fertilization, that is the fertilization process will happen and then it will give rise to the seeds. So what happened then? After cross pollination, he collected the seeds produced as a result of this cross and then he grew them to generate plants of the first hybrid generation. Okay, അത് കളക്ട് ചെയ്ത ശേഷം, so once he collected the results of that the result of that first cross pollination, he tried to grow them and he tried to generate plants of the first hybrid generation, and this generation is called as filial progeny or F1 generation. അപ്പോൾ ഇത് ഈ ഫസ്റ്റ് ക്രോസ് പോളിനേഷൻ കഴിഞ്ഞ് ഫസ്റ്റ് കിട്ടുന്ന ആ ജനറേഷനെയാണ് ഫസ്റ്റ് ഹൈബ്രിഡ് ജനറേഷൻ എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്. ആൻഡ് the generation is also called as filial generation or filial 1 progeny, filial FILAL, filial 1 progeny or F1 progeny എന്നാണ് പറയുന്നത്, or F1 generation എന്നാണ് പറയുന്നത്, right? And from this experiment Mendel observed that all the F1 progeny plants were tall like one of its parent. അതിൻ്റെ ഒരു പാരന്റ് tall ആണ്. So what happened? So all the progenies which were produced were tall in the F1 generation and none were dwarf. Right, and he made similar observations for the other pairs of traits. He found that F1 always resembled either one of the parent and that the trait of the other parent was not seen in them. Okay, but first അവർ ചെയ്ത സ്റ്റെപ്പിൽ he observed that only one parent's character got expressed. അപ്പോൾ അവർക്കൊരു ഡൗട്ട്, ഇപ്പോൾ ടോളും ഡോർഫിലും മാത്രമാണോ അങ്ങനെ വരുന്നതെന്ന്. he tried in other characters also, like using the seed color, the color of the flower, all those things, and even after that he got the same result only. he was not able to observe any change in it. In each of this F1 generation or the filial generation, there were occurrence of only one parent. So, one parent മാത്രമേ അവിടെ express ആയിട്ടുള്ളൂ. So, that is what he saw. So, you can see in the diagram here, children. So, let us just see this.